then press to play. The first paper will be by Abdul. Have 20 minutes to present, 5 for discussion, and 5 for Q&A.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, everybody. So I want to present you my paper on the role of FDI flows and property rights institutions reform in developing countries. So the motivation of this paper is that increasingly it's admitted in economic literature that weak institutions are one of the root causes of weak economic performance in developing countries. Then the question is how developing countries will reform their institutions. Very few papers have, for now, analyzing this fundamental question. So here I'm trying to fill the gap by trying to understand to what extent FDI flows can contribute to the reform of corporate rights institutions. So here is the outline of the presentation. I'm going to present you the related works on this topic and give you a quick view of the main results and the contribution of the paper. Then moving to the empirical analysis and conclude the paper with the policy implications of the paper. So this paper is built upon 3 different theories. First of all, it's economic history. This is based on the work of Nov and Asimov and his co-authors, who show that the participation of England in Atlantic trade during the 17th century has really contributed to implement some reform in the country. More specifically, Asimov showed that the participation of England in Atlantic trade has permitted the kind of merchants to be more and more wealthier, and they took advantage of their richness to demand and obtain some national reform which were key for the development of their business. However, they also mentioned that the existence of efficient or effective parliament which has played its role of check and balances vis-a-vis the king has also helped in implementing some of the reforms during that period. So the third theory on which the paper is based is that of collateral effects of globalization, both trade and financial globalization. This is the work of Scott and his co-authors who show that indeed developing countries that participate to globalization can benefit from different several collateral effects, including the implementation of national reform. So on empirical side, I have to say that to the best of my knowledge, all authors from the World Economic Outlook, meaning authors from the IMF, have done somehow similar studies. However, there are many differences between my paper and their work. First of all, the analysis focused mostly on the composite index of economic institutions, not necessarily on property rights index. So at the end, they can tell really which kind of economic institutions have been improved in countries. And second, also the analysis of several factors that necessarily examine the effect of FDI flows. And third, their sample comprise developed as well as developing countries, meaning at the end, you can really tell what is the average effect. Does it correspond to developed or developing countries? Meanwhile here, I just focus on developing countries. And finally, they use cross-sectional data. When I'm using panel data, I'm also trying to derive from the generalization. So the main result, quick one, I just find that FDI inflows have negative and significant effects on the probability of reforming property rights institutions in developing countries. However, condition on the existence of a minimum level of check and balances and the effect of FDI flows tend to be positive. I have identified that the minimum level of check and balances on the executive power of a catalytic role of FDI flows in the reform of property rights institutions is 3.6. And out of 18 developing countries of my sample, I find that 20 of them have this minimum level of check and balances, and among them, only 5 are in sub-Saharan Africa. So, two quick the contributions of the paper. As far as I know, this should be the first paper we try to understand to what extent FDI flows can contribute to the reform of property rights institutions in developing countries. And also the people are going to find even a minimum level of check and balances on the executive power, which are necessary for a catalytic role of FDI flows and the property rights reform in developing countries. So the main argument of the paper is simple. In a context where there is check and balances on the executive power, the different opportunities that FDI flows offer in terms of benefit, in terms of profit, in terms of technology transfer, and so on and so forth, can be also captured or saved by different several investors in the country, not just captured by elite. So in this sense, FDI flows can allow the rich several investors to be more wealthier, and those investors will take advantage of their welfare and act and obtain some reform which are necessary for the development of their business. So this is the basic idea of the paper, and so to estimate or to tell the argument of the paper, I have to estimate this model. Here you can see that the dependent variable on the left side is a domain variable taking the value of 1 for countries that record a strictly positive change in the index of property rights over a 5-year period and 0 otherwise. So my variable of interest here is a multiplicative variable between the level of content consecutive, meaning the level of check and balances in a country, and FDI flows. And then I also add, here you have FDI flows as a percent of GDP. So the data, as you can see here, basically the index of property rights is from the France Institute, which provides this kind of data going back to 1917. And ordinarily the index range between 0 and 10. The higher the index, the better on the quality of property rights institutions developing in the country. Meaning you have low risk of expropriation, you have high level of judicial independence and effectiveness and so on in the country. And as for the constraint on the executive index, I collected it from the policy for the database, and its initial range between 0 and 10, 1 and 7 it is. And the higher the index also, the higher the level of check and balances in a country. So the FDI data obviously are from Global Development Finance Database, meaning from the World Bank. So I ran regressions with 5-year final data over the period of 1917 to 2005, covering 18 developing countries. I used 4 different techniques of estimation, including the system DMM to deal with androgeneity. Why? Because it's admitted in the literature that countries with good institutions can attract more FDI. Here I'm using the reverse argument saying that indeed FDI itself can also contribute to the reform of property rights. So you need to deal with androgeneity here, and it's never easy to find an exogenous instrumental variable which is valid. So I'm using here the system DMM, which has the advantage to use the internal instrumental variable. So here is the result. As you can see, regardless of the technique of estimation, FDI flows have negative and significant effect. However, when you condition on the level of check and balances in the country, the effect of FDI tends to be positive and significant. And here, according to the result in column 2 of the system DMM, we can find that the minimum level of check and balances for a catalytic role of FDI flows in the reform of property rights is 3.6. And as I mentioned before, out of the 18 developing countries of my sample, only 20 of them have this minimum level of check and balances, and among them, only 5 are from Sub-Saharan Africa. So here I'm giving you a concrete illustration of the result. I'm comparing here in this graph countries for the level of for FDI that they receive and the probability of reforming property rights according to the level of check and balances. As you can see here, high, those who are classify have high level of check and balances are those countries with the level of content on the liquidity higher than the sample average, and those with the level of check and balances lower than average are classified as countries with low level of check and balance. As we can see here, there is no big difference according to the level of check and balances for the level of FGM flows. However, for the same level of FGM flow received by the two countries, you can see that the probability to implement property right reform is about 10% higher than in the countries with high level of check and balances compared to countries with lower level of check and balances. So this graph is a sample one without any estimation, just looking at the data and look at it, and it's well illustrative of the main result of the paper. So to sum up, I have to say that this paper shows that condition on the existence of a minimum of check and balances FGM flows can contribute to the reform property right in developing countries. So FDI come with several collateral effects, but for this to happen, developing countries must create a minimum of local conditions. And this paper has highlighted that strengthening or the creation of effective institutions that play the role of check and balances can be a good start for developing countries to benefit from FDI flows and to undertake some of these kinds of property right institutions in their economy. The paper also highlighted there is a long way to go in this perspective, especially in Africa, where still you have the level of check and balances on the executive power is still lower. As I mentioned before, only 5 African countries have the minimum level of check and balances that have been identified here for a catalytic role of FDM flow in the reform property right institution. So that is the end of my presentation, and thank you for your attention.
I just got the paper very recently, so I don't have a comment prepared, but let's improvise altogether. So I just have a few comments for two. The first one is something that's not clear from the paper, which is in the linear probability model with fixed effects, I assume you're using counter-fixed effects, right? This is when you don't find any effect in the interaction of interest. However, in all the others, you don't seem to be controlled by counter-fixed effect, right?
For which one you mean?
In all the other columns.
I mean, the two columns, panel data, I control for counter-fixed effect, but the probability model, the one with probit and logit, I just use random effect because that's the way it works instead. It's not possible to control for counter-fixed effect.
But yeah, you have a problem in using probit with fixed effects. Because one of the main observations I get from looking at the table is at the net effect of FDI. Basically, whenever you take the mean value of, let me check the name of the, on the constraints of the executive, whether it's the mean or even the maximum value that it can take, it looks like the net effect of FDI, which is the sum of those two coefficients, looks pretty much zero. Right? So I think that's an interesting result in itself, especially the negative coefficient on FDI, which the net effect would be negative for a large proportion of developing countries. So the wonder is why would an FDI inflow have a net negative effect in the probability of having reform, right? So I think that's just an avenue to exploring itself. Then, so of course, I wonder, I'm not sure that the GMM deals fully with some of the concerns in terms of pre-existing trends and the fact that countries, basically countries with high and low constraints to executive to begin with, were already in different trajectories. So when you do that interaction, you will simply be picking up that and make that has nothing to do with FDI, but has something to do with something that we cannot observe or is not controlled for, such as whatever, the political economy of the countries, etc. Well, the issue of reverse causality, whether reform actually brings in FDI. I know you did some, but without when you do the GMM, so you use the instrumental lag values. And finally, something that I guess we could explore, since you only show.
But I think it would be useful for the audience, just if you could tell us, maybe in the paper or the revision or something, tell us a little bit about what FDI looks like in countries that have high restraints on executive power, or what FDI looks like in countries that have low restraints on executive power, because that just might be a simple omitted variable bias story that's explaining the results.
One more question, or should I respond to the...
I mean, at this point, I think like the kind of industry you target for FDI and how you conduct FDI, is a green field or is a partnership or whatever, depends on the social quality.
Okay.
Still that people going to China and Russia and doing investment there, even they are very corrupt and they have a lot of red tape. So
Okay. Thank you. Okay, actually I think that it's an open question. You have a book, you have a literature which show, for instance, depending on the quality of the institution that we're talking about, if it's just democracy or it's economic governance, you can think that a good protection property right can attract FDI basically because there is no risk of expropriation. But on the other hand, if you think in terms of democracy, it will also attract as well as, dissuade foreign investors to go there because in this case, policymakers have a lot of check and balances so that they can give easily favor to foreign investors. So this is an ambiguous result. So actually me in this way, I'm trying to go beyond that, saying that this is not, to some extent, if you create some local conditions, because these foreigners investors, they come with some kind of knowledge, they come with some kind of technology, they come with management knowledge that they can easily translate in the country, and then local investors can learn from that and push for reform possibly in the country. This is the basic idea of the paper. So coming to the fact whether the go in terms of merging and acquisition, unfortunately, actually when you took the FDI data from all the sources, they don't give this kind of breakdown. You have FDI is net inflows, meaning you have new capital minus the repatriation benefit to the host country and also manage the reimbursement of debt. So this is the broad definition of FDI. So unfortunately it will be very interesting, but even at international level there is no this kind of breakdown saying that what is merger and acquisition, what is greenfield. And following to this to the comment of orientation of my discussion, unfortunately I can tell which one is FDI in natural resources or not. But I do something as a robustness check. I also control for the natural resources in rates in the country. So to some extent, I'm taking into account the FDI, the distribution of FDI across sectors. You have it as a robustness check in the paper. So that is what I can say. You can really expect that necessary democracy will attract the FDI in the country. It's ambiguous. You can think that democracy could be good for the enforcement of property rights, which can attract FDI, but democracy also can put much more pressure on local leaders who really cannot afford some kind of incentive tax reduction and so on and so forth. And this one will have a negative effect on FDI flows. So, is it clear or, I have a response to your answer, okay. And yeah, so why, the net effect may be negative, as I said, this is measure of the estimation, seriously. You have positive and negative and you combine both. It's possible that it's negative or neutral because you have to keep in mind that actually FDI flows, they do not go in developing countries with the objective to implement or to stimulate for poverty right reform or so on and so forth. So this kind of effect that I'm trying to capture here is a kind of collateral effect, because this is not the main purpose of government and also investors when that they go for investment in developing countries. They don't go there to make benefits. What will happen later, but if you create appropriate local conditions, you can benefit more than that. That is the basic idea. So for now, as I say, it's not that simple for the effect. As you can see, it's just 20 out of 80 that have this level of check and balances to benefit from this effect that I'm trying to show or capture. So that is something that maybe in future when all this has been possible, with all this governance improvement in Africa and the rest of the developing countries, it's possible that the effect will be more and more bigger, and then we can have something more interesting. But for now, this is what the data show.
Yeah.
Perhaps the constraints on executive power is more relevant relative to the local investment, domestic investment. Why did you not elaborate on that? I would like to listen for you something about that.
About whether it is more relevant for domestic investors.
For domestic investors. Because I don't believe that the big solution for the development will come from FDI.
No, I agree with you. That is what I was saying in the conclusion of the paper. This is a possibility. You are now in a very well globalized world. You can't do anything against that. So sometimes, for some of these reforms, it could just not happen in the country. What I'm trying to understand, because it has happened in the history of, as I mentioned at the beginning, of England in the 17th century, it was just the participation of England in Atlantic trade which has brought all these favorable factors to implement some reform. So the question, when I was reading this literature, I said, oh, why not? Or what is wrong with developing countries nowadays? They are just involved in all this globalization, which will not stop. So it's okay. So then, what kind of benefit they can enjoy from it, and under which conditions? And one of these conditions is to create these check and balances on the executive power. I also totally agree with you that this one could be more relevant for domestic investors. That is why I was trying to explain in the paper that it's not just when investors, foreign investors are coming in the country, they come with new ideas, new way of managing, and also they will come with technology. And so local investors also who are dealing with them can learn, and they can also improve their capacity to contribute to the country by tax contribution, for instance. So they will have more power, and they can push for more reform in the country which are more favorable to them. Can you imagine if a country just collect, let's say, 5% of its tax from its local investors? What can I ask more for reform in the country? But if this one move from 5% to 10 or 20%, so they have more bargaining power with the executive power, and then this could stimulate some of the reform. So I totally agree with you that concerned executive could be more relevant for domestic investors, but the question here is just to try to understand under which conditions we developing countries, given that we are involved in this globalization, which will not stop forever, for sure. You can do whatever you want, this is something. So under which conditions we could benefit from it? So one of these conditions, just strengthen our check and balances system, and then probably we're going to take advantage of these flows related to globalization to improve some of our system and increasing the poverty rate reform. So this is the basic idea of the paper.
we need to move to the next paper. So Juan Pablo Brooks and Roy Holloway, University of London. Again, 20 minutes.
Okay, thanks. This paper in 30 pages, and it's about, as you can see, it's about mining, pollution, and agricultural productivity in Ghana. So basically, the basic research question we want to address is how natural resources interact with local development, with the regional economy. So one interesting question for a lot of African countries, because natural resources are located in very fertile rural lands, is whether there's a crowding out effect from the mining activities to the local agricultural activities. And if so, what mechanism? There are many ways in which the mining activities can actually crowd out this agricultural, this farming, or this agricultural productivity. So why do we care about this question? This is not a usual question in the natural resources literature, but we care basically because of its incidence. Basically, we care because most modern mining occurs in rural areas where agricultural activities are the main source of livelihood, and of course of employment as well. So these mining activities can affect the farming activities in many ways. I will discuss this later. But the interesting thing is that for us is that we're in this session and not in the macro session. Natural resources tend to have a very macro approach in which things like the Dutch disease, which is a change in relative prices that affect the manufacturing sector, for example, or any sector with increases returns to scale, or other political economy issues such as conflict tend to be dominant in the literature. And this is what you might have heard of, it's called the natural resource curve. There's a different approach that we did with my co-author in this paper, Fernando from Simon Fraser, which has to do with backward linkages. So it might be the case that the mining activities have good interactions with local suppliers. But what happens in modern mining in Africa is that this channel is absent in general. So it's something, of course, we can check empirically, but I'm telling you already, this channel won't be important. So why do we care about this? Because in terms of economic policy, if we don't take into account this crowding out effects that is there, and when you talk to people in the field, everyone talks about it, but it's never counted in terms of the net effect of the mining activity. So what might be happening is that we might be doing an overvaluation of the contribution of natural resources to the local economy simply because it's an externality that nobody's paying for other than the affected population. And this also raises distributional issues because a lot of the benefits that these natural resources sectors generate are basically go in terms of taxes to the main cities in all those countries, which of course is not where the mining activity happens. So a lot of people might be benefiting from these tax receipts in this case Accra, the capital of Ghana, while all the rural population where the mines are located are actually bearing the consequences of this crowding out effect. So why do we care about coal mining in Ghana? Very quickly, it's 97% of the mineral revenue. It's a capital-intensive modern mine, and that means that all these relations with the local community won't exist. There's very little or no employment. There's no local procurement of goods and services. So basically, this is like, imagine installing a huge car manufacturer in the middle of nowhere. Wow, that's pretty much what mines do, right? It's an island in the middle of a very rural, fertile area of Ghana. And of course, as I was mentioning, there are potential spillovers. There are two sources of potential spillovers. One is competition for input. As I said, labor doesn't seem to be an issue because they don't hire a lot of people directly. But they might be appropriating lands and basically displacing a lot of farmers. So income competition might be a way in which farming activities are affected. The other is pollution, which is something that the scientific literature has shown that it reduces the yields of the crops, basically. And this has been done in an experimental setting. So there is this link between pollution and reduction of yields on agricultural productivity. So what we do is we try to look at the effect of the expansion of mining activities on agricultural product and productivity. We do that by estimating an agricultural productivity function, and we'll get into the details of how we estimate that and why we think we get an approach to the answer later. And then what we do for the empirical analysis, rather than using aggregate data, we use household level data that gives us information on agricultural input and output. The mining expansion will be proxied by time. We simply say that households in areas that are closer to mines are more exposed to this mining expansion. And this is why we say that the heterogeneous exposure to the mines is captured by distance. So I will discuss this a bit later. So a summary of the results in case you fall asleep in the next 10 minutes. There's a reduction of around 40% in residual total factor productivity. This is huge, but again it's also consistent with the natural sciences evidence on what the effects of pollution on crops are. This is driven by polluting mines. And the knock-on effect is an increase in poverty and a reduction in household expenditure in those areas. And also a byproduct of this is a reduction in health outcomes measured in under 5s, which is captured by nutrition and acute respiratory diseases. In terms of the policy side, we make a back-of-the-envelope calculation, and we know that the fiscal contribution of the mining sector will not compensate affected populations. And of course, there's the distribution issues I was commenting on. So Ghana. Gold mining is very important, 45% of export revenue, 12% of fiscal revenue, a lot of FDI, most of the mineral revenue comes from gold mining. It's mostly foreign-owned, exports all its production of raw material, no local procurement. Remember, these mines are like islands in the middle of very fertile areas. The technology is open pits, large scale and capital intensive technology. That's a 96%. That's a small percentage of artisanal mining. And of course, this is located in fertile agricultural areas that has this potential negative locus spillovers in terms of pollution and displacement of land and labor. And all this is backed up by anecdotal and scientific evidence, right? Even when we went to Ghana, we spoke to like all the stakeholders, including the mines, and everyone was saying the same story. So it's not that. So all these things are problems as perceived by even the mines, not just the farmers. So the data is household data, living standard surveys. We only have 2 rounds. It's repeated cross-section. Those of you who know how to estimate production functions are already raising your eyebrows. I know. We'll try to deal with that later on. We have information on inputs and outputs. We have a poverty measure and expenditures for households. And then we use GIS to obtain distance to mines, the shorter distance to mine. This you might not see here. You have the little triangles is what matters, which is the producers in the time we're looking at. All these other circles here are explorations and developments, and these first here is production that happened after the period we're analyzing. So if you want to blow out, these are the three main regions where production happens. Central, Ashanti, and Western. And these circles here, these little dots are the enumeration areas. And these little circles here are all the enumeration areas that fall within 20 kilometers of mines. I will explain later why 20 kilometers. Okay, so how do we attempt this exercise? So basically, we have a very simple intuitive approach. This analytical framework is not a fully-fledged model in which households are both consumer and producers of the agricultural good. Households maximize utility that depends on consumption and leisure, subject to a budget constraint that depends on the output they produce, and that output depends on productivity, labor, and land. Farmer heterogeneity, we assume that there's farmer heterogeneity in access to market for inputs. So there are two types. Some farmers are not constrained in their trade of inputs in the sense that they can simply choose their optimal amount and use it, either buy it or sell it from markets. So these guys they can simply maximize unconstrained. And then there's another type that is fully constrained people that cannot access input markets. This sounds like a very extreme assumption, but when reading about customary land rights in Ghana, it's not. Basically, a lot of people have the right to work on the land, but have not the right to trade or rent out the land. So for those people, the prediction is that endowments is what matters. Then we have the mining activity that maps spillovers that reduce input supply of land and labor, and then it can affect also productivity A in the production function through pollution. Of course, again, we base this on this scientific evidence that pollution reduces yields and agricultural productivity. So this simple framework provides the basis of the empirical strategy and tells us a few things. The first one is that we need to estimate the production function to tell apart the mechanism, whether it's input supply or it's productivity that is affecting farmers, if there is any effect. The second thing is that we need to estimate well the coefficients in the production function, and of course we can just run an OLS, and that's what we do. But of course, we can also try to improve using a different instrumental variable method that, according to a theory, is guided by these people that rely on endowments. So basically, input choice by farmer, according to type, will guide the identification of this production function as coefficient. And we'll discuss this in the next slide, or in the second, in 2 slides. And finally, we know, because production and consumption are interrelated, that any shock to production will have a knock-on effect on consumption. And because poverty is measured because poverty is measured relative to a consumption threshold, this will also have an effect on poverty levels. So this is our agricultural production function. It's a standard Cox-Douglas, nothing fancy. We assume that the productivity depends on farmer effects, geographical effects, and some time varying effects at the regional level, which will capture the mining activity. So then we simply take lots of that. The actual output is done multiplied by a random shock. And then basically we do lots of all that and we obtain this regression, which is what we estimate. So here we have the inputs, here we have farmer characteristics, here we have district fixed effects, and here's the interaction, which is exposure to mining activity times the time trend, which basically controls for these differential trends in areas closer to mines. So basically, one issue is how do we estimate this? Basically, of course, as I was saying earlier, running OLS is the first step, and we'll say shortly under which circumstances OLS works. But we might be concerned that, basically, we're interested about this to see whether there's any effect on residual productivity. So basically, we have 2 concerns. The first one is that if the coefficient, if the inputs are correlated with this unobserved heterogeneity and these shocks, then all the coefficients will be biased and our residual productivity will not be well estimated. That's our first concern, and that's why we'll do the IB. The second concern is that there is no differential trends for mining areas and non-mining areas. So those are the two concerns that we try to address: the endogeneity of input choice and evolution of productivity. I start with the first one. Of course, OLS would work if formal heterogeneity is fully captured by the controls we're including. That's education, age, gender, whether they're landowners or not, all these typical controls at the household level. If all these controls capture this heterogeneity and these differences between households, then the OLS would work, and basically our estimates of the Bloch-Sum function would be well identified. Otherwise, if it doesn't, basically we need to rely on the model. And the model tells us that input endowments are a good predictor of input use if the fraction of constrained formers is large enough. So now, basically, we're moving the problem from input choice to endowment. So if endowments are uncorrelated to the error term, then we're fine and the standard IB works. If they are not, then we need to come up with something else. And what we use is the imperfect IB strategy, recently published by Lev and Rosen in the Review of Economics and Statistics, that provides bounds for the estimates subject to much less restrictive assumptions about the correlation of the error term and the instrument. So basically, if the instrument has cell sign weaker correlation of with the error term than the instrumented variable, then this imperfect IB strategy will give us bounds that will allow us to say we will not point identify the coefficient of labor and land, but we will say this is an acceptable range where this estimate could be, so we can obtain the resulting residual productivity. So the good thing, well, it's not a good thing, it's a feature of the model, is that the model also predicts that if the fraction of constrained formers is large enough, these assumptions hold. And I have 5 minutes. Okay, so next to the second problem, the difference in difference assumption, the idea would be that in the absence of this mining expansion, areas close and far to demand should basically should be the same, right? So in order for a difference in difference assumption to work, what we need is that the evolution of the unconditional mean of, in this case, agricultural output actually shifts in the period of analysis. And this is what happens before our period of analysis, and this is what happens after. So what we observe is a change in the trend of households close and far to demand. And this, of course, as any definitive assumption, relies on this idea that in the absence of the mining sector, the two trends between households in this group or in this group would have been the same. Okay, so this is a summary table of the main results, whether we use OLS, the IB, or the imperfect IB instruments. What we find is that basically we obtain estimates of the land and labor coefficients, and the residual productivity is negatively correlated with expansion of the mining activities in areas closer to the mine. So what we're finding here is that residual productivity is going down. So that suggests, when we contrast the channels between whether it's input competition or pollution, that there is a pollution story because of this reduction in agricultural productivity. Of course, you might be thinking, well, maybe it's not pollution, it's something else. I'll discuss it in a couple of slides if I have time. So here I'm using within 20 kilometers. I told you I would tell you why we use 20 kilometers. We have two reasons. One, again, is we rely on this scientific evidence that shows that the effects of pollution can actually affect yields and crops within 20 kilometers of the emission source. And the other is that rather than relying on that, we just run a flexible specification and we take households within 5, 10, 20, 30, 40, and 50 kilometers of the mining area. And what we find is that the negative effects are prevalent only for households within 20 kilometers. For households further away, the effect is insignificant, basically. So how do we know it's pollution? Well, we're struggling to get data on actual pollution at the ground level, but because we couldn't do that, we rely on NASA satellite imagery that actually gives us a cross-section in the period of analysis of the concentration of the dioxide of sodium. Nitrogen. Someone knows? NO2, basic concentration is still. So basically what we obtain is something similar, that the concentration levels are much higher in areas closer to the mine. Of course, this is a cross-section, so we cannot do, basically we cannot include those measures in our regression, but what we can do is use it in the cross-section, and what we obtain is that the same effect, that this concentration is correlated with a negative productivity for farmers. So remember that I told you I wanted to contrast with input markets. There is no evidence of an increase in factor prices, which is what would happen if mines are actually increasing the demand for factors, and then the land or the labor available for farming goes down, and actually agricultural wages go down, which is which is consistent with this idea of agricultural productivity going down. And then with respect to alternative stories, we run a battery of tests in terms of compositional changes, whether there's a change in sectoral occupation, in the education mix of the population, in the crop choices of farmers. Whatever we run, we don't find anything. So there's no evidence that something else than pollution is actually driving our results. So remember the knock-on effects on poverty. Again, you can see very neatly the diff-in-diff effect there. Between 89 and 98, which is a period before our analysis, the trend was a reduction in poverty in areas close and far to the mine. After that, the trend is completely reversed for mining areas only. This, because of this reduction in agricultural wages, affects producer and non-producers' households. And then there's no evidence of changes for urban households. And I don't have time to discuss a lot, but we find lower nutritional levels for under 5s in areas closer to the mine, and also higher acute respiratory diseases. So, 2 slides, yeah? Contribution cost. Back of the envelope, it's very simple to understand. We use the coefficient of our expenditure estimates, and we multiply by basically by the number of households, and what we obtain is that an average household loses around $400 per annum. That's 0.29 per person per day. Remember of this dollar a day measure, right? So that is already telling us poverty will go down a lot, will go up a lot in those areas. But then we take a look at the mining-related fiscal revenues in 2005, and the contribution is 75 million. We contrast this with total losses, which we estimate at 158 million, and we see that the net effect of the sector in terms of fiscal contribution is negative. The second thing we have to look at is who receives the money. And what we find is that 80% goes to the central government, which is further away from the mining areas, and only 9% of the fiscal revenue goes to local areas. So it's not just a net negative effect, but it's also a huge distributional impact in which bureaucrats in Accra get maybe higher wages because of this, of all this money in terms of taxes that the government receives, but the local communities do not receive a lot of compensation. So what we find is that the expansion of the mining activities are associated to a reduction in agricultural productivity and an increase in poverty. The channel is a crowding out through pollution and not through competition for inputs. And there are huge redistributive effects. Local farmers lose, capital city gains. And this disregard for these spillover effects overestimates the net benefits of the sector in the economy. So that's it.
So I'm discussing about this paper. In economics, discussant means the guy who will try to destroy the paper. In this case, it's going to be hard. This is a well-thought, well-developed, and well-written paper. But
He's my friend.
yeah. So, first, I think I have to say that I buy the argument that pollution is bad for agricultural productivity. So I'm not a climate change denier. And I buy that your argument is valid for organic. So I take, I believe in the result of the paper. Some facts, okay? I will argue that we have there certain function, something that tells you is the maximum amount you can get of output given inputs and technology, okay? So when you're in the frontier, I mean, increase the output because you increase the input, or you have the change, that increasing productivity. We know that in Africa, yields are 1/3, 1/2 of the yields in developing countries. Okay? So I would argue that aid for a farmer in Africa is a variable of choice. They can choose the package they're going to use to produce the crop. Other facts. Ghana is characterized for having farmers that low self-esteem. Okay? There's a national Farmers' Day in Ghana because people are going out of farming activities. A lot of the output that you mentioned there is coming from cocoa. Cocoa is the main cash crop for Africa. And the cocoa, how it works, I mean, you plant a tree, the tree is good for the next 25, 30 years, and then you have to replace it. Okay? So there's a moment in time where you have to say, do I change the tree, or I keep using some tree with lower productivity? Okay? So, 70s, boom. See, I mean, cocoa is up there, everybody is using cocoa farmers are happy people. End of the 70s, the commodity boom crashed. Okay, so there's no investment during the 80s, it was the beginning of the 90s, and the economy and the price of the cocoa started to pick up when? At the late 90s. So now I'm in the late 90s and I have to say, well, will invest in cocoa? Yes or no? I'm going to plant a new tree. I'm going to use these inputs, the things, okay, these inputs. And then I said, look, if I'm IFPRI or if I'm the Ghanaian government and I'm about to invest in cocoa, would I will do that? Well, if you tell me that the late 90s is when the production of gold started to pick up also, well, if I know that mining has a negative effect, I may not change the technology package in those areas and only invest on the others. Okay? And we know that happened at the end of the 90s, because you read the last Overseas Development Department research on Ghana, they show that the last 10 years, productivity, even if lagging behind with other developed countries, increased a lot. So the yields in cocoa increased a lot. Okay? And those decisions, I mean, those increasing in the productivity and the yields of the cocoa happened because of decisions that were taken at the end of the 90s. Okay? So now, you tell me ex post that you don't think that this is because of pollution and it's not because of competition inputs. Okay? But you don't know what the guy at the end of the 90s was deciding to do. He was not investing in that, he was not investing in the technology there because of expecting changes due to pollution, or because there was going to be competition for inputs, like in the case of the copper belt in Zambia. We don't know, so that's something that is hard to pick up. One thing you could try to do is that, okay, you believe it's pollution, and then you need to have somebody who really knows about agronomy. So you need to ask, the gold pollution, they affect all the crops the same way? It may not. It may be more damage for maize than for cocoa. So one thing you could do is look at the districts where you have the pollution in mind and see if there was a change in the productivity of the different crops. The ones that are more affected by emissions, I mean, those are the ones you see a lower increase or a decrease in productivity. That's one thing you will maybe do you did it. It's not in the paper. Or I didn't read the paper. Okay. One thing is that, okay, this is happening. Okay, this is having a welfare effect. So I would like to know the behavioral response. Look here, there's no behavioral response from the farmers. I mean, you tell me there's no change in the educational level. I mean, just for perception, you have some guy twice. You cannot know. So what they did, these people? Did they migrate? Did they change crops? And if they migrate, who migrate? And we know that in Ghana, those who migrate are not the very poor, neither the wealthy farmers. Are the guys in the middle, right? So this composition effect, it doesn't show up in your result, but we know that Accra grew like crazy in the last 10, 15 years. I mean, I drive there. It's impossible. Okay? The city was prepared for the 70s, and now, I mean, the whole country lives there. Okay? And we know who are those people, and they are different. Okay? From the ones who stay in the rural areas. So is that happening? I mean, like to consider also on the paper to see if that validates or not your results.
Any other questions before I kill him? That's either because I mean, you understood everything or you didn't understand anything. So I'm happy with both. Okay, production function. I don't care about the block. So this is for this region in Ghana, right? So this is how I estimate the production function. I'm estimating it's using farmers in that area. And of course, if you're on the boundary or the frontier of productivity is set by these farmers. So, so whether it's a choice or not a choice variable, I agree it's an observed heterogeneity that we cannot control for with our controls. And this is why we try to address it with the IB and with the IIB. But in terms of, we're not comparing the agricultural production function of a farmer in Kansas with this. This is just given by these farmers. So, but again, I don't shy away with the fact that A might contain nasty things for our strategy. And we're working on that. In terms of cocoa, I like all your nice story, I knew it. So basically, we've broken down the data in terms of whether they do cocoa or maize, and it's very relevant. So basically, your point is very relevant, not because cocoa is the main product of Ghana, but it's also because this is the cocoa belt. So this is where cocoa happens. So if I was using another region, that wouldn't, but your comment fully applied. So what we try to do is, given our data, is look exactly at that, investments, right? Because the thing with this is that if there's not expropriation, for example, or pollution, it might well be the case that people decide not to invest. The cocoa yields you start reaping the yields of cocoa planting after 4 or 5 years, even though it's a long-term investment. So, so we looked at the probability of investing in cocoa, planting cocoa. We have that information. No results. We look at whether cocoa becomes a less important part of total production. No results. We look at maize, we look at cassava. We did a battery of results that, you're right, might not be in the paper, because we were looking for exactly that story, the investment story. I mean, Ghana has a lot of, Bentley has a paper on how people don't invest in Ghana because of customary land rights, for example. And so we were looking for that fact because we were thinking of a dynamic model of investment and we couldn't find anything. So we had to drop that story. But we will keep looking for it. We're not saying it's not happening. In terms of the differential effects in crops, it's the same. We slice the data in as many ways as we could, whether it's, for example, vegetables versus cereals, whether it's things like cassava that have like 3 or 4 cycles a year versus maize that has 1 cycle. All these things, again, we couldn't find anything. It might well be because the data is too noisy, right? And so I'm not saying nothing's there, so just we cannot find any evidence.
So do you mean that the pollution affects all the crops in the same way? That would contradict natural science.
No, I'm not saying it affects because I'm not saying it affects all the crops in the same way. But remember here, we basically the way we deflect, for example, is with aggregates, and so we don't have physical quantities to use for each of the crops because we don't have land and labor allocated to each of the individual crops. So doing that exercise would be very nice, but data constraints. But again, we cannot rule it out, but we cannot rule it in because we don't have any evidence in what we do. Then in terms of migration, again, we looked at that. There is some information on whether people were born in the area or not, or whether they were there 5 years ago. Again, we can't find anything. Maybe we're not looking at what you're saying, which is maybe you have like inverse shape in terms of the probability of migration, and richer and poorer don't migrate and people in the middle do. This is something we will look at because we haven't thought about it. We don't know.
It's one thing in this area.
Are you okay for anything?
Thanks.
Thank you. Any questions? Sorry.
Oh, you can talk.
On the last one.
Did I need to keep time?
No, every time. No, please, do.
So 20 minutes and...
Yeah. So, okay, I'm Nicolas, blah, blah, blah. I work in Asset. This is a project that was financed at the beginning by grant from the World Bank and the Dutch government. They're very thankful. The problem with this is that from the research there came more questions than answers. So we got a second grant. It's a second part of the research that's being done right now. And it's funded by DPIP and EFRC. So market competition, export cash crop and farm income in Africa. Story, for those who don't know the little bit the story of this. Colonial powers in Africa centralize extraction of resources using state company. As the French have a regulator of export of cocoa and Cote d'Ivoire, you have the British getting tobacco and cotton from Zimbabwe, Malawi, Zambia. So when country became independent, the new country, they keep this monopoly, right? So if you want to export cocoa, or cotton, or coffee, you have to sell it at the price that was set by the government to the government, the government company, and the government company will export. Okay? So that was very good because it was a good source of fiscal revenue for the government, and it also was good somehow because the government has some space to smooth price changes. So if the price was too low, the government would give a subsidy. If the price was too high, the government would take a higher tax. Okay? These parastate companies, they all collapsed in the late 70s, beginning of the 80s because of the commodity crash. So there was in the 90s a lot of pressure for these governments to privatize this company, to deregulate the market. Okay? So what we have today is that we have a picture of countries where there is one monopoly that is private, or two companies, or 10 companies. So the level of competition for each cash crop varies by crop and by country. So what I'm going to be doing here is ask a simple question. What happened if the level of competition for these cash crops changed in a particular country, given the status quo? Okay? So I followed the trade and poverty literature. This guy has a very simple question. How can trade help the poor? And what are the mechanisms? If you look to the paper, all those papers look the same. It's a two-step methodology. The first step, you have a model on how trade will affect prices. And then when those prices change, they go to the household data and measure the effect on well-being. Typically, if trade reduces the price of something you consume, you will be better off. But if it's trade decrease the price of something you produce, you will be worse off. So how does the supply chain in our approach? Well, let's story here is one of imperfect competition. What happens if I change internal market structure, the level of competition? What happens with prices? Okay. The idea is that in this cash crop supply chain, you have many participants. You have the farmers on one side, have intermediaries, transportation, etc., processing company, exporting company. Typically, farmers are smallholder, so have no market power, so they accept the price that is paid to them and decide how much to produce. And other agents, in particular exporting company or processing companies, sometimes the same company, are only a few. So there are 1, 2, 3, or 4. So they have market power. So changes in the structure of the value chain will affect the price paid to the farmers. So I mean, if you ask anyone, who's not an economist, if there is more competition, that will be better for the farmer. So if it is that the only story here is how much, okay? But that's not the end story, because I also want to think that the results of this policy will depend on some market distortion. If you live in Africa, you see that the market distortions are everywhere, right? So if you apply the policy, more production is good for the farmer, in a context where there are market imperfection, that result may not hold. Sometimes, story of the second best, sometimes doing something that is not the best works better. So the impact trade will have on poverty, or the impact more competition in the value chain will have on poverty, will depend on the market distortion that are present in a particular country. What market distortion? There are many. Here in this paper, I will focus on liquidity constraint. In cash crop, to start producing cocoa, coffee, tobacco, cotton, you need some startup investment. You need to buy the seed, the fertilizer, mainly pay for wages. Farmers, smallholders, typically very poor people, don't have savings, don't have assets. They cannot afford that. They need to borrow that. How this gap is, how it's filled in practice? Well, typically is the grower contract. I'm a farmer. I have no money. I will go to the company and tell, look, give me the inputs I need, pesticides, seeds, fertilizer, and I will sell you the output back to you. So what I will show here is that, well, there's an interplay between the market structure and the distortion. And the result of more competition may be misleading when you have imperfect competition. You have a liquidity constraint. Story. Zambia, cotton. The government said, I'm going to liberalize. I'm going to sell the state company. So there was a monopoly, it was a private monopoly. And then they said, well, I will introduce more competition. I don't want to have only one company. I want to have 2 companies, or 3 companies, 4 companies. When the government did, the main company, when it was already in place, said, oh, okay, you introduce competition, now I may suffer on side selling. The farmers may come to me for inputs, I will lend them the inputs, but now they can sell the output to somewhere else. They can default to me. Okay, and that's what happened in Zambia. Nobody decided to produce, to provide the inputs, Okay, so the production collapsed. That's what we made in the paper. So what we have here is a study on how the internal structure of the export market and the level of competition affect poverty and welfare in Africa. We have a series of country crop curves, case studies. We have cotton, cocoa, coffee, and tobacco, and for those we have some countries. For example, for cotton we have Benin, Burkina Faso, Cote d'Ivoire, Malawi, and Zambia. In the paper there are reasons why I chose this country and crop. So what we do here is we're going to combine some modeling and some data to see what is the result of more competition. So I have a model, very simple model. It's a model to try to change in input agriculture. Very simple. I have 2 agents. The first agent is the farmer. The farmers are going to be optimistic, small. So give me the farm gate price, they will decide how much they will produce. Give some characteristics of the farmer, how much land they have, how productive they are, some preferences. They will decide how much to produce for the export market, the cash crop, or how much to produce for the home consumption, the food crop. I produce tomatoes, or I produce cotton, or I produce both. Firms. The firms are very small at international level, so they take international price as given, but they recognize that they have market power. So when they maximize profits, they will choose price or quantity, depending if it is Bertrand or Cournot, and see and set the price on what is thinking that they have some market power. Okay? For this particular paper, what I do is I assume that the firms behave as Cournot. Okay? So they will choose a quantity, okay, knowing that that quantity will affect and equilibrium the price paid to the farmers. The equilibrium, how it looks like, well, on the firm side, will depend on how many firms I have, and what is the market share they have. So I can have two companies. It's not the same for a result if each of them have 50% of the market, or one have 90% of the market, and that have 10% of the market. And also it depends on firm characteristics, typically the cost structure. On the farmer side, it depends on the endowments, land, preferences, and productivity. So what I do is I solve this. I found the equilibrium. I calibrate the equilibrium, so giving household data and macrostructure data, I found the parameter that represent better this country crop case study. Once I have found the equilibrium, what I'm going to do is comparative studies. What if I change something? Okay? What I'm going to be changing here is the market structure. Okay? So I'm going to be shocking the market structure. So I have several of them. The first one I call it the leader split. It's not very happy choice for it because people think that I will actually split the company. What actually I do is I introduce a new company that have the same structure of the most efficient company. The most efficient company, in equilibrium, is going to be the one that have the larger share of the market. Okay? So now if there's more competition, the new company that enters the market has the same structure, cost structure of the leading company. I re-estimate the model, and that will give me changing price and quantity in equilibrium. And other ones, small engine. What happened is this new firm entering the market, and that company has the same cost structure of the less efficient company that's already in the market. I have leaders merge, less competition, the two largest market share companies, they fusionate in one. So the most efficient company can go out of business, equal market shares, if they have 5 firms, all of them have the same cost structure of the most efficient firm, so in equilibrium, they will have all the same market share. Or perfect competition, where I say, okay, the price paid to the farmer is the international price minus the processing cost. Okay? So when I do that, I can do for every country and crop, study how the price paid to the farmer change and how the farmer change the quantity supply. Okay? For instance, this is the case of leader split. Leader split, more competition. In Burkina Faso, that will result in a price increase paid to the farmer of 23%. And as a result, the farmers in Burkina Faso will produce 21% more of cotton. On the other side of the spectrum, have Uganda coffee. If the leading company in Uganda coffee splits, that will increase prices only 2%, and the changing quality will be also around 2%. Why is the case? Well, it depends on a lot of things, but mostly the result is being driven by the status quo. In Burkina Faso, cotton, there are 3 companies, and the leading company has 85% of the market. So if I split that company, that means a lot of more competition with respect to status quo. In Uganda, Yugaco, that is the leading company in the market, has only 16% of the market. So if you split Yugaco, yeah, there will be more competition, but not much more. Okay, so the price change will not be huge. Here another result. I showed you, for instance, what happens to farm price and quantities when we have the equal market share result, and then the prices increase up to 37%. So now the other side of the story. Okay, I have a broad contract. Now I will assume that the farmer, when he wants to produce a quantity, a part of that quantity, lambda of that output, has to be financed. So to finance, has to go to the market and borrow and pay an interest rate R. R, the depends on what? The interest rate paid by the farmer depends what? Depends on the cost of capital. Okay, it's going to pay at least what the firm lending has to pay in the market, so this is R star, but also depends on the market structure, the shares. And the assumption here is that when I have only one company, I know that the farmer cannot default on me. If the default is going to be because of economic reason. I mean, there was a drought, we couldn't produce the thing. But it may happen that if I have a lot of competition, there's no concentration in the market, the guy can easily default on me. And this is an argument that happens in reality. In Burkina Faso, the company have 85% of the market telling the government, look, I did all this investment with the farmers. If you introduce competition, I will not do it anymore. Okay? It means that in equilibrium, I will charge them a high interest rate. In the example of Zambia, that means an infinite interest rate. I don't lend you at all. Okay? Infinite looks like an exaggeration here, so we decided to parameterize this interest rate function as a function of the confidence index that measures the degree of competition in the market, and I will say I'm going to standardize this function in such a way that at most the farmer will pay 3 times because of capital. So say, look, when there is a lot of competition, the farmer will pay 3 times because of capital. So if it's confidence is 5%, in equilibrium the farmer will never pay more than 15%. Okay? Those who work in Africa know that 15% is a very low interest rate. Farmer pays much more. So, welfare analysis. When the welfare analysis works, I have price changes coming from the circulation, and in the household data I have how much of the income comes from each crop. Okay? For instance, some farmers in Zambia producing cotton receive only 20% of their income from cotton. Okay? So I multiply price change and income share and I have the welfare impact. For instance, in the case of cotton Zambia, if the leader were to split, that will increase the income of the farmer by 3%. Why is so low? Well, in Zambia, farmers produce only 20% of the farmers produce cotton. And of those producing cotton, only 1/3 produce only cotton. So on average, for the whole population, the income share coming from cotton is very small. Okay? So you have here change in welfare with a split, there is more tension, if there is less competition, or is there a little bit more competition, equal market share or perfect competition. In the perfect competition case, you see that farmers in Zambia producing cotton will get up to 19% more of income. I can split the sample between poor and non-poor, and what I found is that in general, the non-poor household benefit most for more competition. Why? Because the poor household, they only produce for subsistence. Okay, they don't produce for export markets. I also can split the sample on male and female farmers. And what I found that in general, I think in 8 of the 12 cases, the male farmers benefit more than the female. Why? Because female in general produce for food consumption, food crops, and not cash crops. This is a result for cotton in Burkina Faso with and without a world contract. So what you see is the gains or losses when you don't have a world contract, and when you have a world contract and the interest rate is increasing with the level of competition. What you see is the result, when levels are not that different, the percentage change is much higher, right? For instance, in this case, if the leaders merge in cotton in Burkina Faso, if you don't see a world contract, that will be a loss. But you consider the fact that there is a world contract, actually, the farmer will win for less competition. I told you, I show you mostly cotton results. Here I show you cocoa, coffee, and tobacco. And I show you a simulation when the largest company goes out of the market, so less competition. So if there is competition, that will reduce welfare in Zambia, using tobacco, by almost 5%, and will reduce, for instance, in Uganda household producing coffee, less than 0.5%. Conclusions, I have only 1 minute. So we developed this game theory model supply chain to study how about the internal structure of the export market effect welcome in rural Africa, what we found is that yes, competition is good for the farmers, but when the changing condition is very small, it doesn't affect farmers a lot. We also see that male-headed, non-food households tend to benefit the most. With a broad contrast, the positive effects of increasing competition are reduced, and the negative effects of less competition are reduced. The effect is small, but in cases like in Burkina Faso, it may change the results a lot. Okay? And this is with a very conservative parameterization of the interest rate function. Further work is needed. I only show you the Cournot solution. If the Cournot, why not Bertrand? It's not that easy technically. It could be done maybe. This is a very simple supply chain. So I have only two layers, farmers and exporters, and in reality, it's much more complex. In particular, in this case, I assume that farmers have no market power, and it's not always the case. You have the farmers' unions that are very strong in some countries, in particular in Burkina Faso. Here in this model, the farmer can only choose between a cash crop and a food crop. What we see in reality is that they produce a lot of cash crops. The guys who produce cotton in Zambia also produce tobacco. Okay? So a more realistic model should take that into account. Here, coffee is all coffee, right? And we know that there are premiums, okay? The quality matters a lot. Here I abstract from that. I didn't take that into account. And that's important because the level of competition may have an effect on quality. If you have capacity constraints and there's more demand for the stuff you produce, you may have to lower the quality. Okay? Other thing I didn't assume is that I didn't look to international market. And I said, look, here more competition is good. But more competition means, okay, it's more efficiency. See, you reduce the monopoly inefficiency. But now the domestic firms have less power to sell the commodity to international companies. Okay, and that's the problem. The farm gate price is the same for all farmers, and it may not be. If you live far from the city, you pay lower. If you are a male-headed household, you pay higher price. If you're a female-headed household, etc. Well, and the other things to do here, in particular, I don't consider how the structure change. I ask if the structure change, what happens? But what matters also for policy is how do I make this structure change? So most of these issues could be incorporated in a richer model, so I feel I can do a more complicated model. But in the context of Africa, the challenge is always to find the data to estimate this more complex model, right? One thing we did in the paper you have there is on 90 pages. We started to be 90 pages, say, okay, we'd rather do a book. So we add 100 pages of blah blah, and we publish this book. Okay, but again, the book I think is more like a beginning than the end of a research agenda. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so actually I have comment on the paper and just a quick summary of what the paper did. And so basically what the paper did here is to try to see how increasing the competition among farm exporters can affect the grain prices and the level of income of farmers in rural areas. And the general finding is that competition is good in that sense that it increases the price of grain farmers' prices and also it increases the income of rural farmers in rural areas. However, when the effect of outgrow contract, meaning when farmers receive some kind of input before harvesting, so this positive effect of competition is reduced, and even in the case of Burkina Faso, this one has to be negative in the sense that competition seems to be bad. And also one key finding of the paper is that small change in terms of competition doesn't have a significant effect on the price as well as on the incomes of farmers. So I have to say that I'm joining the paper and I learned a lot. So, however, I have some comment and question. So I feel that the first finding, which means that outgrower contract reduce the positive effect of the competition, and specifically in the case of Burkina Faso, need more explanation. I mean, I'm wondering what does this mean? Does it mean that the enforcement of contract is worse in Burkina Faso? And I'm not sure that this is true, because actually a quick look at, for instance, doing business report, you can find that the ranking of Burkina Faso is 180 among Sub-Saharan Africa. Meanwhile, the average ranking for Sub-Saharan Africa is 117, mainly having for the quality of enforcement of contract in Burkina Faso compared to the rest of Sub-Saharan. So I was wondering what can drive this result. Does it mean the enforcement of contract is worse in Burkina Faso? Not sure. I mean, if you just focus on this doing business finding that I just mentioned. So I think that we need really more explanation on what happened there. And the second point is that the paper said, oh, small change doesn't matter. How small is small? I mean, what is there a minimum level, or is there a minimum size of the competitor firms to have really effect on all these effect of competition in Africa? What's the minimum size of the competitor to have really effect on the farm gate and prices, and also on the income of the farmers? So this is the second comment or second question. And the third point that I wanted also more explanation on. Actually, the paper talking about supply chain, and when you are talking about supply chain, maybe you have many stakeholders or many actors which are involved. But when you look at the paper, I have some questions that the authors just studied the direct link between firms and the farmers. So I was wondering what would be the change, what would be the result if, for instance, the effect of intermediate were taken into account. I don't know how easy it would be to take into account of that. But I was wondering, because when you were talking about change, you can think between the growers, between the farmers and the firm, perhaps of intermediate, and how this can affect the result if it was to be taken into account. And actually, I want to quick one more explanation on 4 assumptions. The first one is outgrower contract will increase the interest rate that farmers are supposed to pay. And this one is something new, because for all kind of competition, we can find that more competition is going to reduce all kind of prices. But here you have the impression that with outgrower contract, if you have more competition, meaning farmers have to pay more interest rate. Seriously, I need more explanation. I was not really, I couldn't find a good understanding of all this. And another assumption that also the author did is that the exit of the lead farm, you're going to make things worse. I mean, you're going to. So I was asking, how come? Because we can think that, because actually the authors assume that the lead farm is kind of the most efficient. I want to say that not very sure, specifically in Africa. It's not because you are the most efficient that you are necessarily the lead farm. And actually, the authors assume that the exit of the lead farm is going to reduce and even going to collapse the market. So I will not really, just more explanation if any. And the last point is, what are the policy implications of the paper? I mean, what really can you say? Is outgrower contract a good option for Africa, or should we look for other alternatives to provide some input that our farmers need? Or what are the policy implications? Is competition, every kind of competition is good, or what does it mean? Really, I need the policy implication of the paper. So that's it for now, and thank you for it.
I may take question answer, but let me go to the full. I mean, he put a lot of questions out there. Sorry? Yeah, I think they have to have First thing, I mean, I'm proud of the model is a structural model where the results change and not in a reduced form. But for that purpose, when I go there and I say, okay, I'm going to introduce a game inside the game, right? If I want to do the structure, I need to introduce the game on how firms and farmers negotiate how much you lend me and at what price, and it was too complicated. Okay, so I took a shortcut and said this is a reduced form, and it depends on this. That depends on the cost of capital. I mean, that's something reasonable, right? That you will not lend at a lower rate as you cost you capital to you. Then, taking a question from you is that why, when there's more competition, the price increases instead of being reduced? And this is because what we learned from Stevens White, right, where the credit market, they're very funny. They don't adjust by price, but by quantity. You have some adjustment by price, you want a larger loan, you have to pay a large interest rate, but after some point, you become too risky, and then they take this quantity. Since I didn't want to put quantity expression in here, what I do is that there was a price increase. So the farmer will decide in a little to borrow less. Okay? But what happens is that the firm is lending less, okay? Because of this risk of default. That's pretty much for you. You told here that small change, I say that small changes have a small effect, and what is the size here, right? What is the reason where size does matter? So you need to keep competition a little bit, you will have a little effect, right? But what's important more here is that the status quo. If there was no competition at all, if there is more competition, relatively, it's a lot of competition. If there was a lot of competition there, and you put much more competition, on average, there's not much more competition. You see? So the status quo matters more than how much is the change in the level of competition, right? Supply chain, I mentioned that. I'm not that smart. I decided to do 2 layers, exporting within firms and farmers. You will introduce, that will change, right? But you need to have data on the market structure of all the other things. It's both very hard to get the data on market share of exporting companies. People in Africa are very secretive. Or, I don't know, they don't want to do the data. So that with that data is already a nice contribution, I think. Then, how many transporters do I have? Are there a local monopoly or a global monopoly? I don't know. That's something I cannot do. But the good thing of papers like this is that there are many questions that are not answered. So the PhD students will write thesis on this. Okay. Each of the larger make work. Okay, here is the economic model. So I assume that the larger firm is the larger because we have the most efficient cost structure. So they will increase the mandate, the commodity process, and the material cost will not be that high. So in equilibrium, they will have a larger share. That's an assumption, right? It may be that the larger firm is the largest one because the owner is the cousin of the president. Thus, kind of result, I mean, I cannot imagine with this model. Okay? I mean, it's something more complex. It's just an assumption of the construction. Did I answer any of the questions? Yeah. We work in the same place. I can answer to you later.
Sure.
Okay. One Pablo.
Yeah, I want to keep back with the cocoa market in Ghana. So here you have like, I think you have like 11 intermediaries.
So these are percentage point firms, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So, but these are the guys that go and buy off the farmers.
Yeah.
But what you have in Ghana is a cocoa board that actually regulates the price.
Yeah.
And I think there's some evidence that they used to have the monopoly on buying off the farmers. They open up, but since they regulate the price,
yeah,
there's no competition on price.
Well,
There might be on quality or on credit or whatever, but what you observe is that what farmers get is the same under both regimes.
The PBS is the company that buys cocoa. That's what I right? Ghana was very regulated. We had the cocoa board that was the only one buying cocoa to the farmer. Then the World Bank told them, if you want to get some loans, you rather have competition. So cocoa board, what they say, okay, I will allow other companies to buy from the farmers, but at a price that's figured by me. Okay? So in principle, there is no competition by price. So how do the farms do? Well, I buy from you, I build a school for you, or I give you inputs at a different price, or I give you a loan, or whatever. So there is some competition there. You don't see it in price, but it's there. It's not used in the regulated market price, but there is a shadow price that includes all these amenities.
Yeah.
Okay?
Is there any way which you could quantify that, or
No, I'm assuming that that results in different in market share. That the guy who give more benefits, higher price, gets a larger share of the market.
Okay.
What
Yeah,
you
but
may not
observationally, an effect of having a split should be zero, right?
Sorry?
The observation. The effect
Well, the split will be have a new company that give as many extras as they already was already in the market. It's true in the case of cocoa in Ghana, the implementation of the model is not straightforward. We need to really modify it. And I knew that was.
Yeah, I know that.
Yes. No. Any other question? So I think we are ready to go.